This is Mr. E, also known as the Bearded Music Teacher podcast channel. And today we have episode 11, which is centered around Sam Phillips. And for the video people, I have the RCA Elvis deal slide up. Um, and there's a reason behind it. So today, before we jump into the podcast, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware that this podcast is used for educational purposes. This is a way for my students to get a quick, concise look at what I talk about in class, so that way when they go to review for things or if we have a test, they can easily pull this back up and quick study it and move on with their lives. And today is kind of a bonus episode. I wasn't originally going to do this in my list of podcasts. However, I figured it would be a good idea to kind of throw this in as episode 11 and trying to kind of jump everything back, because as we look at the construction of rock music, the genesis, if you will, of rock music, Sam Phillips was uniquely tied to that. A lot of people think, oh, well, it's Alan Freed. If you look on the surface, so if we want to use like an iceberg kind of mentality or analogy, what we see is the big first wave of rock guys. Guys like Fats, Little Richard, Elvis, Chuck Berry, Jerry Lee Lewis, Buddy Holly, Bill Haley. What we don't see is one guy in particular, and Alan Freed. Alan Freed was big into that. But what we don't see is Sam Phillips, at least on the surface. Sam Phillips is under that water in a lot bigger way than what a lot of people think. And while I haven't gotten a chance to read it, there is a book that would be something of interest for people. It came out in 2015, and it's called Sam Phillips, the man who invented rock and roll, Sun Records. And it's a yellow cover, and you can find it on Amazon and other retailers. It isn't. It's by a guy by the name of Peter Gorelick. I want to say. I'm terrible at pronouncing names. It is 784 pages, according to what I've found on the internet. But there is, in my class, I actually showed them a video of the author that was on, I think it was like USA Today when they released the book. And they talked about how Sam Phillips was a friend of his, and that Sam Phillips really did a lot in the way of, in the music business, changing it to not only include a huge way that we dealt with the industry and taking rock music seriously, but we also see that he did his best to blur the what was called the color line of segregation in the United States in the 50s, right leading up to the civil rights movement. The civil rights movement was already slowly brewing at this point, but in the 1950s, you kind of had this idea like, hey, look, we need to have this movement. But anyways, that's a topic for some other person to deal with. Now, Sun Records specifically, um, was located at 706 Union Avenue in Memphis. And this guy by the name of Sam Phillips, uh, he was an engineer, a sound engineer, a radio engineer from Florence, Alabama, who opened up his studio in 1950 and begun making distinct label Sun Records for local blues talent in 1952. And he would go on to produce guys like B.B. King, Howlin' Wolf, Elvis, Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison, Johnny Cash, and a smaller guy by the name of Carl Perkins. And he remembers, he actually was quoted talking about Elvis. Now, when Elvis came in, like I talked about in the previous podcast, episode 10, is that Elvis came in and recorded a record for his mom, actually, for her birthday. And then he stumbled on it, and then that grew eventually the uh, the career of Elvis, and then the RCA deal with Elvis that was $35,000 because let's be real here. Sam Phillips needed that money, and it was a blessing for him because he ended up getting Jerry Lee Lewis to stay on, Johnny Cash, and the guys I listed earlier to really bring more revenue into Sun Records. Um, and when he saw Elvis Presley walk into Sun Records for the first time, Sam Phillips said this. He tried not to show it, but he felt so inferior. He reminded me of a black man in a way. His insecurity was so markedly that of a black person. Now again, that is the end quote. That's the end. That's the whole quote that he said. Um, and so he noticed that Elvis was really really shy, and it wasn't really until he got uh, until Elvis came to terms his with his fame that Elvis was really kind of humble and shy about everything. And Carl Perkins once said, "This man, meaning Sam Phillips, had a knack. He had the capability of spotting raw talent because look at the guys he spotted. Check them all out. They're all they're they're all still around. Um, Guys like I said before, and Charlie Rich. I forgot about him, and Carl Mann even goes on that list of people that he has done over the past years of his recordings. And he wouldn't um, he wouldn't so much put a lot of stock into um, polishing them. He would purposely put the raw talent in there. He would just be like, "All right, you want it? Let's go. We got to have it as exactly the stuff that we hear every day." He did a huge service to the record industry, and I want to point out this quote too from Sam Phillips. Now I have to remind you that we are using historically accurate information. This is a direct quote. It's pretty long, but Sam Phillips says, and I quote: "When I first formed my label, the input I got from the distributors, the jukebox operators, and the retailers was that white teenagers were picking up on the feel of the black music. These people liked the plays and the sales they were getting, but they were concerned, saying, we're afraid our children might fall in love with the black people." At that time, three categories of pop music, country music, rhythm and blues were all just miles apart. And yet, it if you took the southern country person and a southern black, they were so close together. It still that line came right down. So in no way to undermine the black people that gave me my start in this industry, I felt that if we could get plays on the radio and generally better acceptance for this music because white people were doing it, it would help. It couldn't hurt the black man because he could hold his own in music with anybody in the world. So Sam Phillips, and that's the end quote. So Sam Phillips really looked at it by saying, look, it doesn't matter. What I'm looking at is the teenagers of the time are really looking at buying and playing this certain type of music. So why not do it? Simple business 101, where if you see a need for it, you're going to do it. Now, he went on to be really a founding or foundation member, I guess you could say, of that rockabilly music. Even though Phillips hated, but generally accepted the description of the music. He did not like the idea of rockabilly. He just thought it was music. And some of the things that you can check out, because I've gone on long enough about this topic for right now, there are some books, like I mentioned, the Sam Phillips book that I mentioned earlier, and I'll give you the title of that again. It is called Sam Phillips, the Man Who Invented Rock and Roll Sun Records. There's other books such as Catalyst, the Sun Records story. And that was in 1975. That's going to be harder to find. Um, and then Jerry Hopkins wrote Elvis, a biography, which is it's less than definitive with when it comes to Sam Phillips. It's not so great. I've read reviews on it where it's like, yeah, we mention Hopkins, or Hopkins mentions Phillips, but it's really nothing to really say anything about. But the one that was first mentioned, that one you're going to want to check out if you want to dive deeper into it. And then I would highly recommend that you look at the whole stable of artists. Those again are um, Roy Orbison, of course, Elvis Presley, Jerry Lee Lewis, Howlin' Wolf, Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, Charlie Rich, and Carl Mann. I want to say, I want to say, yeah, Carl Mann. Check those guys out and enjoy Sam Phillips. So that was just a little bit of bonus for you. Remember to follow me on Twitter, which is at MR underscore E underscore music FCS. And please share this podcast with everyone. Please share the channel with everyone. Again, this is a podcast for educational purposes for my students. And I look forward to making more content for you. Go back and enjoy the previous 10 other episodes. And we'll be doing more as we roll through rock history.